I took the job because I needed the money, and because I told myself it would be easy. Both of those things were true, right up until they weren't. My name isn't important. What's important is that I was 27, between jobs in the way that sounds temporary but had already been going on for 4 months, and when my neighbor Helen, a retired schoolteacher in her mid-70s, asked me if I'd look after her late husband's estate while she recovered from hip surgery. I said yes before she finished the sentence. The arrangement was simple. Helen's husband, Gerald, had died the previous year and left her a property about 90 minutes outside of the city, a large farmhouse on 12 acres. No working farm, just land and a house that needed someone to walk through it twice a week, forward any mail, keep the heat on low to protect the pipes, and make sure nothing had broken, flooded, or been vandalized. She'd been managing it herself since Gerald died, but couldn't make the drive after the surgery. She offered me $300 a week, cash, for what she estimated would be about 2 hours of work per visit. She gave me a key, a list of what to check, and a spare phone number for a neighbor named Dale, who lived about 2 miles down the road, and had always been good about keeping an eye on things. I drove out the first Tuesday in November. The property was everything you'd expect from that description. Long gravel driveway, bare trees, a farmhouse that was large and well-built and completely silent in the way that empty houses are silent. Different from how a house sounds when the people who live in it are simply out for the afternoon. A deeper quiet, a settled one. I walked through the checklist. Furnace running, pipes intact, no signs of water damage, mail collected, 3 pieces, none urgent. I locked up, drove home, texted Helen that everything looked fine. Easy money. I told my friend Marcus about it over the phone that night and called myself lucky. The second visit was the Friday of the same week. I let myself in through the front door, same as before. I'd been in maybe 2 minutes, hadn't even taken off my coat, when I noticed something in the kitchen. There was a mug on the counter. This was not unusual in itself. Helen had left a few things out when she'd last been there. She hadn't been expecting surgery so soon and hadn't done a thorough clean-out. A mug on the counter was nothing, but this mug had been used recently. There was a dried ring of tea inside it, the kind that forms when liquid evaporates over a day or two. Not weeks, not months, days. I stood in the kitchen for a moment and looked at it. Then I went through the rest of the checklist. Everything else was exactly as I'd left it on Tuesday. Furniture undisturbed, no signs of entry, windows latched, back door locked. I convinced myself Helen had been out here between my visits. She'd said the surgery had gone well. Maybe she'd felt up to a drive. She'd forgotten to mention it. I washed the mug. I don't know why I did that. Some instinct about leaving things tidy. I put it back in the cabinet. I texted Helen that evening. Everything looks good. Were you out here this week by any chance? She replied the next morning. No, still resting. Doctor says another 2 weeks minimum. Why? I said it was nothing. A mug left out. I probably hadn't noticed it Tuesday. She said, I haven't been in that kitchen in 3 weeks, hun. I drove out the following Tuesday with a different feeling than I'd had the first 2 times. I noticed I was paying attention to the driveway as I pulled in, looking for tire tracks, footprints, anything that suggested someone else had been there. The gravel was loose enough that it didn't hold impressions well. I couldn't tell. Inside, everything looked normal. I went through the checklist slowly, methodically, room by room. In the second bedroom, a spare room, single bed, quilt folded at the foot, I found the quilt unfolded, spread across the bed as if someone had slept under it and pulled it back up loosely in the morning. Not thrown, arranged, with the specific, inexact care of someone who doesn't want you to know they've been there, but isn't quite careful enough. I pulled the quilt back. The sheet beneath was creased, in the shape of a person. I checked every room after that with my phone in my hand, ready to call someone. Closets, the bathroom, the basement, which was unfinished and smelled of old wood and concrete and nothing else. No one was there, no other signs. I called Dale's number, the neighbor Helen had given me, from the driveway before I drove home. He picked up on the third ring. I explained who I was and that I was looking after the property for Helen. I described what I'd found and asked if he'd noticed any vehicles on the road, anyone coming or going. There was a long pause. Then he said, "How long has this been happening?" I said, "This is the second time I've noticed something." He said, "There's been a light up there some nights. I figured it was you. I figured Helen had someone in." I said, "What kind of light?" "Upstairs window," he said, "moving, like a flashlight maybe." The second bedroom was upstairs. I told Helen everything. I want to be clear about that. I called her that same evening, told her exactly what I'd found on both visits, told her what Dale had said about the light. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that I've thought about many times since. She said, "Gerald's brother knows where the spare key is." I asked what she meant. She said Gerald had a younger brother, Norm, whom she hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years. There'd been a dispute after Gerald died, something about the estate, money, the way these things go sometimes in families. She'd told Norm he wasn't welcome on the property. She'd meant to get the locks changed and had never gotten around to it. She said, "I didn't think he'd actually go out there." I asked if I should call the police. She paused again and said, "Let me try to reach him first. Give me a few days." I said, "Okay." Looking back, I should have pushed harder. But she was a 70-something woman recovering from surgery, and it was her family and her property, and I told myself she knew the situation better than I did. I went back that Friday. The bedroom was exactly as I'd left it on Tuesday, quilt folded, bed smooth, nothing in the kitchen, nothing disturbed, but there was a smell in the upstairs hallway, faint and specific. Cigarette smoke, the stale, clinging kind that gets into fabric and walls. I hadn't smelled it on any previous visit. Gerald, Helen had mentioned on the first day, had quit smoking 15 years before he died. I stood in the hallway and I listened. The house made the sounds empty houses make, settling, pipes, the low hum of the furnace. Normal sounds, all of them. But I was aware, standing in that hallway, of the size of the house, of all the space I couldn't see from where I was standing, of the basement I'd checked only briefly, of the attic door in the ceiling at the end of the hall that I hadn't thought to look at before. The attic door had a pull cord dangling from it. The cord was swaying slightly. Not swinging. Swaying. The way something sways when it's just been released. I left. I'm not ashamed to say it. I walked back down the stairs and out the front door, and I locked it behind me, and I sat in my car in the driveway for a moment before I started the engine. I called the non-emergency police line from the car. I explained the situation, the signs of occupation, the neighbor's report of lights, the possible identity of whoever was using the house. The dispatcher was professional and patient. She said she'd send someone to do a welfare check on the property and asked me to wait in my car and not go back inside. A deputy arrived about 40 minutes later. She went through the house while I waited outside. She was in there for about 20 minutes. When she came out, she said the house was empty. No signs of current occupation. The attic was clear. Storage boxes, old furniture, undisturbed dust. No indication anyone had been up there recently. She found a half-empty pack of cigarettes in a kitchen cabinet she'd checked that I hadn't, behind some old cookbooks. Could have been there for years, she said. She took down the details about Norm, said she'd pass it along. She told me to let Helen know and to call back immediately if I found signs of anyone inside. She was kind about it. She didn't say I'd imagined it. She also didn't say she believed me, not fully, and I could tell the difference. Helen reached Norm 2 days later. He denied everything. He said he hadn't been to the property since the funeral. He sounded genuinely confused, she told me, not guilty, confused. She believed him. She said, I don't think it was Norm. I asked her who else knew about the spare key. She thought about it. Gerald might have told people. He was friendly like that. He trusted people. A pause. There was a man who used to do some work for us. Handyman, odd jobs, we used him for a few years. Gerald gave him a key once when we were traveling, and I never thought to ask for it back. I asked if she had his name. She gave me a first name and said she wasn't sure of the last name, something with a B, she thought. She said she hadn't seen him in almost 3 years. She didn't have a number for him, she said. I always liked him. He was very quiet, very self-contained. A pause. Gerald said once that he didn't think he had anywhere much to go. I did one more visit. I told myself it was because I needed the money, and because probably nothing would happen, and because Helen needed someone to keep checking the house. All of that was true. But the real reason, and I've been honest with myself about this since, is that I wanted to know. I wanted to understand what was happening in that house. I'd been going out there for 3 weeks by then, and I'd been unsettled every visit, and I had this feeling, this specific feeling, that I was circling something without quite reaching it. I wanted to reach it. I pulled into the driveway on a Tuesday morning, same as always. I sat in my car for a moment before going in. There were 2 mugs in the dish rack, both clean, both damp, recently washed. I had washed 1 mug on my second visit. 1. I stood in the kitchen and looked at them. Then I looked around the kitchen carefully, not anxiously, carefully, and I noticed what I hadn't noticed in any previous visit. On the window above the kitchen sink, on the inside of the glass, there were 2 small patches where the condensation had been cleared. The kind you make when you wipe the glass to see out. From the sink, the cleared patches lined up exactly with the driveway. Someone had been standing at that sink, watching, and had seen me arrive. Every visit, possibly from the beginning. I put the key on the kitchen counter. I walked out of the house. I called Helen from the driveway and I told her I wouldn't be coming back. And I told her why. And I told her to call the police and have the locks changed that week, both things, and not to go out there herself. She called me the next day. The locksmith had found the back basement window unlatched from the inside. Not broken, not forced, unlatched. The kind of thing that's easy to miss on a walkthrough if you're not specifically checking it. She had the locks changed and the window fixed. She hired a property management company after that. She called me a month later just to check in. She said nothing else had been reported. She said the property management company hadn't found any signs of anyone. She said, I hope he found somewhere to go. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't fully. There's something in it that I keep turning over, the kindness of it, but also what it assumes. That whoever had been in that house was simply lost, simply without options. That the explanation was sad rather than something else. Maybe she's right. Maybe it was exactly that simple. But I think about the cleared patches on the kitchen window, the care of it, the consistency. 3 weeks of visits, and every time, before I'd even made it to the front door, someone already knew I was there. That's not lost, that's watching. That's patient in a way that takes practice. I don't do caretaking work anymore. I found a different job, indoors, with other people around, which I now consider a non-negotiable feature of employment. If you're ever asked to look after an empty property, and it's more common than you'd think, people ask favors like this all the time. It sounds simple. It sounds easy. Do one thing before you agree. Ask when the locks were last changed. Ask who has a key. Get a real answer, not a guess. Empty houses are only empty until they're not. And by the time you find out the difference, someone already knows your schedule better than you do.